Hi, and welcome back to Plastic Models by a Regular Dude and part 2 of the Takom 1/35 scale M3 Lee Mid. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to be doing a blow-by-blow build. I'm just going to touch on things from time to time, talk a little bit about what's going on, point out some things to watch for, that kind of stuff. So far, step 1, which is the lower hull, that's all completed. Nothing really of note to talk to. It all fits together well. Some things I'm going to have to look at and work on is I'm going to use some Vallejo acrylic putty to fill in these seams right here because they're not supposed to be there. And then I'd mentioned in my introduction video, part 1, that I was going to have to look and see if there was supposed to be some texture on some of these parts. And the transmission housing here does have texture on the real deal. It's not real rough like some of the cast vehicles can be, but there is some texture, so I'm going to have to put some of that on there. And for that, I'll be using Mr. Surfacer 500. And when I actually do that, I'll talk about it so you can see what exactly I am going to do. So I'm on to step 2, and I'm putting together the bogies right now. I've got all the components cut apart, and these parts glued together. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 parts here. As you can see, those 4 parts, I've got these cut out and ready to go. Now I'm getting ready to work on this. Now, one thing to note and to watch for on this kit, and I found it in a few places, is where the ejector pin marks, there's these weird little parts that are left over on the push pin, so you'll need to cut those off. They cut off really easily, but just, you know, keep an eye out for them so you don't end up with big old blobs of plastic in there that could hinder the assembly process. There was some on these parts here, and there was a little bit on these side parts here as well. So again, just something to look for. It's no big deal. It's just you know, part of the molding process, I reckon. And just make sure that you get those cleaned off well, like that. Okay. So anyway, I'll continue on this, and I'll put this other stuff together, and if I run across anything that I think needs mentioning, I'll come back. Alright, let's take a look thus far at what we've got going on with the old Lee. So I've got the tracks on this side here, and as you can see, don't have any big gaps. Now, I will say that I think I mentioned it in one of the earlier segments that one of the things people stressed about and some people had problems with were the tracks and having about a half link gap when they got to the last part putting it together. Now that would be very easy to do. These tracks are extremely tight toleranced, close fit kind of thing, and you have to take your time in a serious kind of way. Let me get my other light down here and see if we can see a little bit better. Yeah, that'll work. So for example, there are separate links that need to be assembled around the sprocket, around the idler, and then a link in between this segment, and this segment. So this part up here, using the jig, works fine. That's fairly easy, and it has a specific link that goes on the end of the long piece to create this part here. I did that one first. That was no problem. Set it aside. Now on this part here, what I did is I glued these links onto the drive sprocket. So if I did mention it earlier, and I'm saying it now, don't glue the drive sprocket or the idler on. They fit on really snug, so it gives you some room to work. So I glued those parts on to the drive sprocket. Then what I did with these links here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the L4 links, is I glued them all together in a flat segment, almost like it would look like this, but it was glued together, not solid. And then before it sets up completely, then I wrap it around the idler to get the curve I want. Once I do that, then underneath, like in between this one and this one, mainly this link right here, I actually glue cement to the idler. But I leave these a little bit flexible. That way, where the curve is and the link is, if I have to pry it up a little bit, I can. It gives me a little bit of flexibility to fine-tune the fit. Then I glue this link here onto this strip, which is what I have here. And as you can see, it's kind of curved. And what I did is I fitted on the back with this up against the idler, and then just bend this to match the contour of the rear of the rearmost wheel here. So once I did that, I let all that set up a bit, then I can start assembling all of it. And it takes positioning, tweaking, positioning, tweaking. These parts here, when I glued these together, when I put the links in place, I can show you with this, okay? They fit together just like this, those separate links, okay? But don't jam them all the way in and cement them. You want to leave the same amount of gap that's between the end connectors on these pre-molded parts as you do on the parts that you glue. So you're going to be able to see daylight. I don't know if you should be able to see. You can see light between those links. Okay, that's what you want. If you jam them up, when you're doing 10 links, you're taking up just enough room that your tracks aren't going to come together at the end. So you want to leave a little bit of gap between all the links that you glue, about like that. Okay, that way it gives you some flexibility. And then it's a matter of just lining it up, getting it together. Now I just glued this one, so as you can see, this part goes here like this. Okay, and again, you want to keep the gap between the links that you're cementing together. Okay, that fits like that. I've got this one up here, and that will fit together like that. Now this one here, I'll have to bend up just a little bit so it fits properly. It doesn't have a kink in it. But that's one of those things that you need to monkey around with and make sure that it fits. Now, if you find that things aren't lining up just right and you've got a weird kink in your track, just use some cement and soften up all your joints where you've glued them together, and you can twist these like that to get your tracks down a little bit further to where they'll fit right, and you'll get rid of that kink. Okay, so on this side, once I got it all together, this was the last part I had to do. So what I did is I squished it together, made sure it fit appropriately. Now I have a little bit of a gap there, which appeared afterwards, but it's on the bottom. You can't really see it. There's no kink in the track, so that'll just have to do. This was the experimental side, and it slipped on this tape a little bit, but I used a piece of tape, I smashed it together, put the tape in place to hold it, and then applied the cement. So you end up with an acceptable amount of track. Now, while the tracks are drying, I figured I'd clean up the fenders, the side part of the fenders, and the sides of the upper superstructure. And this is just a quick tip. What I like to do when I'm cutting parts off the sprue is I like to cut it way back from the sprue gate and leave a bit on there. On a flat surface like this, it makes it real easy. If you've got a good cutter, what you can do, you can cut it off flush, but I find that trying to cut it off flush this way doesn't work as well as if I turn it kind of at an angle like this, cut it off. It virtually eliminates any cleanup. If the part is slightly angled and you haven't had it flush, then you can trim it off. There's not really anything there to trim off. But that's just a little tip. Kind of helps to make cleanup a little easier. Saves you having to sand or file parts, which can sometimes lead to too much material being removed, too much plastic, and then you'll have problems. Okay, pretty simple. You know, it's just a case of where a good set of cutters can make a difference. Do you absolutely have to have them? Sure don't. Use whatever color cutters you got, even a knife. And then just use a sander and or file and or your hobby knife to get that cleaned up. It's just the way I do it because, you know, there's been times when I've removed just ever so slightly too much on something, and then you end up with a weird gap if you're not careful. All right, so I'm going to work some more on these tracks and then come back. All right, so the tracks are complete. All that worked out fine. No gaps, no weirdness. It worked out fine. So the next part is I started working on all the superstructure, and you really got to be careful putting it together. Well, I shouldn't say careful, but methodical, and take your time, test fit, test fit, test fit. So everything so far has gone on quite well. You know, I thought about doing some things differently, but I went ahead and followed just exactly like the instructions said, and it works out fine. Yeah, you put this side on first, then this side. Well, I mean, you do the fenders first. Those fit really well. Then you do this side and this side. You put this little slope part on, this little flat piece here. I didn't do the doors yet. I saved those. Then you put these two front plates here on top of those. Then you put this plate right there, and it all actually works out really well. I was kind of concerned that I'd end up with gaps and stuff, but by doing a section at a time and smashing it together, make sure it sticks, it's worked out fine. Now this one here, I need to do a little tiny bit of cleanup, which really can be done with the edge of a knife just to get it smooth. And then once you do that, what I like to do is use the my Tamiya extra thin and just smooth out any burrs. Okay, I've seen some of these put together and they just, man, there's just gaps all over, and it's just, it doesn't look good. But see, just like that. Now, one thing that's nice about the plastic on this thing is there are some corners, like right here. I had kind of a gap there, and I just used some Tamiya extra thin, let it sit, use some more, and this plastic, it seems to melt really well, so those gaps get filled in. So just multiple applications of extra thin in those cracks, in those seams really do wonders. Now all this up front here, it went together just fine. So once all those are done, all those pieces are in place, I did the next step, which was put all this together. All that worked out fine. The barrel, you know, it's a plastic barrel, but it has a mold seam on it. Now those are just discolorations from cutting the barrel off of the sprue. That's where the sprue gates were. It's smooth, so it won't show up once there's primer and paint on there. But it all fit together fine. You know, the barrel is hollow. You really don't need, I don't think a person would need an aftermarket barrel unless you just like them, because this one works just fine, especially with that counterweight, because this end part here glues onto this, and it could be smoothed out, you know, with a little bit of filler and sanding, but with the counterweight on it, it covers that seam up, so you didn't have to mess with that. This part here, if you're not familiar with this kit, is a long single piece that you bend. It's got bevels molded into it, and it works like a champ. No problems. No gaps, no nothing. It just all worked out really well. And so the next part is starting to glue. You know, you do all that, and then the next part is you have to glue the superstructure on top after you glue this in place. These here, they went on fine with no problems. This part here, just do it a section at a time. So I snapped it in place and it wasn't lining up. See, it doesn't line up quite correctly right there, but that's okay because I got all this glued into place. Let that dry up, and then I'll be able to pop that because it's got this little locating tab right there that fits into a slot right there. So I'll let it dry up, then I can pop it into place, no problem. I already test fit this into place without this, and it seems to fit really well, so it shouldn't be too big of a deal. But the trick is with this multi-part thing is just do a section at a time, move all the way around, just make sure everything is lined up perfectly. Right here, this side plate butts up against the back of this fender, or the fender ends here, but there's a notch in the sponson here that butts up against. Just make sure that is slid forward all the way, and your back end should line up just fine. So that's where it is so far. So I'm going to continue working on this part and then come back and see what it looks like. All right, a quick tip. So when you get ready to put this on here, there will be between this part here and this part here a little bit of a gap, no matter how hard you squish it. But here's the trick. Right along this edge on the inside is higher than the edge on the outside. So if you just sand or scrape just on the inside part of it, that will close up that gap. I just did a test fit, fits perfectly. And don't forget to clean that mold seam right there. Either scraping it or sanding it. Okay, but yeah, that's all it takes. Just a little bit right there, and you'll be good to go. It'll fit nice and flush. All right, so I just put the last two parts on the lower hull. So up through step 15 is complete. So the entire hull, lower hull, is done. Photo etch, pretty groovy. All the tools in place. Everything fit pretty good. I do have to admit, full disclosure here, I had a horrible time getting this back plate on. I could not get it to stick into place. I couldn't get it to just rest in place so I could cement it, and it was quite frustrating. Yeah, other than that, I'm ready to move on to step 16 and 17, which is the turret, and that will finish the kit up. So I think this video is long enough, so I'm going to end it right here with the completion of the hull. Again, turned out good. Not really any major issues. Just the nature of all of these hull plates and stuff. It's just a matter of being patient, taking them one at a time, and getting them lined up and everything. Other than that, pretty cool. So that's it for now. Next time, come back, take a look at the turret. So until next time, thanks for joining me here on Plastic Models by a Regular Dude, and I will see you all later.